Hi, good evening, everybody. Welcome to the webinar. It is the 1st of June 2015. This webinar, as I recently re-recorded, has been one of the most popular webinars that we have. And I think it's because it really is the foundation of family therapy, of therapy. It's the place that we start with all of our clients. And I've really updated it now because one of the chapters of my book talks about communication. And there are plenty of books on communication, but part of the twist that is a part of the update of this webinar and part of the update and evolution in my thinking is that it's not just a tool or a technique that makes the difference, but really it's the mindset that we come at it with. It's why we use communication tools. It's what the goal is in using communication skills and tools, what we're trying to accomplish. And there's some unhealthy ways to use it. And like I always say, you can take a hammer and you can use it as a weapon and you can use it as a tool to build something. So it's not necessarily the intrinsic value of the tool of the skill, but it's how we use it and what's the context of it. I found it fascinating when I first became a therapist and started doing wilderness therapy. We weren't the only therapeutic program that really uses communication skills as the foundation. I thought to myself, what does that have to do with behavior? And part of the concept is that teaching people, young adults and adolescents, communication skills and tools gives them a place to unpack their pain, an avenue to express it other than symptomatically. So that's really what we're going to talk about tonight. And perhaps most importantly, we're going to talk about how and why you can use it and be effective. Communication skills help us connect to our children and ourselves. As we become more clear about the relationship between the events in our lives, our thoughts, and our feelings, we'll be better able to see our children and provide them with a safe context in which to work through their difficulties. So that's the beginning point. What are we doing when we're using communication tools? And one of the two or three most common mistakes that I see parents make is that they think that having or acquiring or using an effective communication tool is going to cause behavior change in the child. In fact, a lot of us think that in our relationships, we share our feelings with the sometimes explicit, but at least implicit hope often that if we express ourselves well, that the other person will change their behavior. It is to say, it's like we're saying, I feel this way, and if you want to make me feel better, and you're kind of responsible for that, then change your behavior or do something different so I'll feel a better, more appealing emotion. So the first thing we need to understand is why we use that, and this is why we use it, and that's from Journey of the Heroic Parent, of course. Tonight, I'm going to talk about meta communication, and this is really at the crux of therapist training, and that is to understand the difference between what is said and what is meant, or another way of talking about it or labeling it as processing content. If it wasn't for that, if what was said is what was meant, we really wouldn't need therapists to the extent that we need them. So part of my training and part of all of our training is to sit there and listen to parents and to say, okay, here's what you said, but this is what I think it might be meaning. This is the what it leads the other person to believe or hear in many of these circumstances. And so you're really going deeper than the syntax, than the content of what is said. And the simplest example that I can give, and there are going to be others tonight, is when somebody says they're upset and the person responds by explaining the situation differently. The real meaning of that is, let me give you a new perspective so you're not upset. Let me clarify. Let me give you a new vantage point so you're not upset at this process. And the deeper meaning would be is that you shouldn't feel those feelings. The thinking and the feeling that you have is wrong, inaccurate, and therefore you shouldn't feel. That's an oversimplified example. And that gets into tonight when we talk about listening, what is included in listening and the long list of things that's not included in listening. So tonight we're talking about process and content and learning to distinguish the difference in ourselves and in those that we're listening to. Pathologies, addictions, neuroses, and symptomology very often have their roots in the unexpressed emotional pain of the individual. Like Carl Jung said in one of my favorite quotes, neuroses is a substitute form of legitimate suffering. We use communication theory to help equip individuals and families with a tool that facilitates feeling, healing, and integration. The feeling statement is an avenue to feel, connect, choose, and change. So again, it's just an opportunity to express. We talk about symptoms as leakage, right? That it's coming out sideways. And that if we were really capable, we would be able to hear everybody's maladaptive behavior. We'd be able to hear it and the wound that it is expressing, the pain that it is expressing. So that's really what we learn to do, and that's why, as therapists, the training is and the process is sitting in a session and listening to somebody and asking questions and getting to the point where you can understand where their pain is coming from. Then, when somebody's pain is understood, layers beneath the symptom, layers beneath the passive aggressive behavior or the substance abuse. But when somebody is understood and seen in that way, what they can do is then address the issue at its root. They can unpack, uncover, bring out that pain. And really, essentially, we're just teaching people how to feel. So communication is this model for teaching us how to feel. And when we understand how we feel and where it comes from, we can more likely respond in a flexible way instead of a reactive knee-jerk way, right? We have choice the more we understand where it's coming from. And it's not all about insight, right? There's disease and there's organicity, meaning genetically we're loaded. There are those things. But this is a tool that helps get us at least to the starting point in all of these areas, whether we're talking about mental health or addiction. A couple of foundational models that I'll visit today are the wellness cycle and the shame cycle. And there's a webinar that I wanted to make you aware of that if you wanted to go more in depth with the next two slides, you can go to that webinar there and find it. So let's talk about this general model of health and wholeness. And I don't know how well you can see this slide. I can see it pretty well, but I'm sitting really close to my computer. Let's just imagine, and this cycle happens over the course of hours and days, and of course over the course of our life. Let's imagine that we're at a state of contentment, a sense of well-being. And when we have desired experiences, that is enhanced, right? We have positive emotions, emotions that appeal to us. And those emotions might be examples of gratitude, hope, peace, joy, happiness, and love. And then when we have undesired experiences, and we're all going to have them, like divorce, rejection, death of a parent, criticism, sexual and physical abuse, and of course the unfortunately that list is endless. Then we experience undesired emotions. So that's the basic process. Nothing complicated about that. And this is where it gets to the point where the road starts to split. We have two ways that we can go with it. We can feel through it, right? We can get through it by breathing and feeling and expressing ourselves, learning even to strengthen the emotional muscle where we learn how to feel, or we can develop symptomology to help mask it and cover it up. Like Carl Jung said, it's a substitute form for legitimate suffering. So legitimate suffering is feeling pain. The two simple examples that I like to use to illustrate this are Yoda and Darth Vader. When Darth Vader experienced the death of his wife, he turned into this controlling monster. When Yoda experienced death and loss in his life, what did he do? He cried. He felt. Simple as that. So we develop substance abuse, school refusal, stealing, electronics addiction, self-injury, all of these symptoms. And of course, at the core of them are hurt, sadness, loneliness, fear, anxiety, insecurities, all those feelings. And the way out of it is to talk about it. If we could just say to people, feel, just feel, we would. But part of the way that we facilitate helping people feel is we ask them to tell the story, to talk about it, to name it. And then if we're doing a great job as a therapist or a parent or a friend, we do this thing called containing. We just sit with it. We allow it just to be there. We might empathize. We don't solve. We don't rescue. We don't fix. We don't teach. We don't manage. We don't do any of that. We just sit with it and contain it and listening. And then through that process, the individual learns how to feel or feels it and expresses it. And then they have a sense of integration, a sense of wholeness, a sense of meaning comes to them through this process. So it's really just about learning how to feel. That's the most simple way that I describe therapy, or maybe even more specifically the way that I describe wilderness therapy is we're teaching people how to feel. I want to mention this because this has a lot to do with our feelings. Shame gets in the way of us expressing ourselves. We feel wrong or bad. So let me illustrate this model for a little bit, and then I'll go on to the specific communication principles, tools, and also talk about family systems. So I drew this up one day when I was thinking early on in my wilderness therapy career, how come our clients and students look so good, especially many times the first few days of the program or right after they get an impact letter? but then they go back into those symptoms right away again, or it happens after they leave the program, or it happens in my life. And this is a model that describes that. So there first has to be a capacity. You know how a lot of you talk about your children being manipulators? Well, that ability to manipulate also comes with a certain capacity. There is a certain sensitivity, an empathic ability, an ability to perceive and read other people. So that's where if we start at 12 o'clock on this model, that's has to be there, has to be present for this. And then what happens, and it's almost all unconscious, is that we are capable at making other people happy, happy with us, happy in life, right? We perceive what they want and we become that for them. And so the focus is on meeting others' needs and our image of ourself because we don't have a strong sense of differentiation. If you're happy about me, I am good. If you're unhappy about me, I am bad. That is the undifferentiated relationship of the parent and infant. I don't know where I stop and you start. And we reinforce that in parents as parents when we try to tell children, you're doing this thing that's making me unhappy. You need to change. So I'll be happy. My serenity is your responsibility. My happiness, my ability to sleep at night. I can only be as happy as my own most unhappy child, right? We teach our children this, not just unconsciously, but we actually teach it to them overtly at times. So this process goes on. Our children learn what to be. They learn to read even as infants our subtlest of facial expressions and to internalize that as a sense of goodness or badness. And then, of course, through that process, they don't take care of themselves. Their needs are repressed, are not expressed or sought after or taken care of. And then at some point, the self is going to say, you know what? I'm going to take care of myself one way or the other. I'm going to feed myself emotionally and spiritually. I'm going to feed myself with food or with drugs or with cutting or with sex or with obsessive behaviors or whatever it is. I'm going to feed myself somewhere. So self-head needs are met, yet it's through maladaptive strategies or symptoms. And then there's this experience. We again, because we don't have a sense of differentiation, we start to project that onto others and we say they're making us do this, right? This is that time when the child comes to you and said, you just wanted me to be good in school. You just wanted me to play soccer. You just wanted me to be beautiful. You just wanted me to be academically successful, whatever it is. And the parent has the experience of saying, I didn't say any of that. I just wanted to be happy. I thought you were happy when you played soccer. I thought you were reaching your full potential in school, so I was happy for you, right? That's the experience of the parent. So the person believes that the other person is making them perform. They believe that these messages are explicit almost. And they're forcing me to sacrifice myself, and I'm the victim here. And then, of course, that doesn't work for long because resentment starts to build, right? I start to get angrier and angrier. The maladaptive behavior can escalate at this point. And then there can be this overt cutoff and blow up. That's why we have students and clients, young adults and adolescents, that will say to their parents, screw you, I hate you, I don't value anything that you value, right? That's when your children don't seem to, in fact, they seem committed to exhibiting all the opposite of your values at home. Right? That's what's going on. That's what it looks like. And when I tell parents, that really comes from a sense of feeling smothered or lost. Or I'll say to parents, your child really looks up to you and wants to please you. And they'll say, what are you talking about, Brad? My son hasn't done anything I wanted in the last 3 years. My daughter's, she's actually living in a way that's in opposition to all of my values. But that kind of overreaction is evidence of this dynamic, of this shame. Otherwise, it would be more balanced. It wouldn't be so extreme. So there's this blow up disconnection and overt cutoff. And then there often is this deflated experience, which often happens in the beginning of our program. Deflation is not humbleness. It's not humility. Deflation is humiliation. Deflation is that feeling that we have where we go from thinking we're the best to we're the worst. That's going from inflation to deflation. We talk about that as therapists when you think you're just a rock star and you've got it nailed. And then something happens on your caseload or in your group and it's not going well and you think, I shouldn't even be allowed to do this anymore. Because you're basing your sense of self on others, on this thing that's outside of you. So you go into this deflation mode and then you go back to the sensitivity and perceptibility and meeting the needs by performing for others. So how do you get out of the shame cycle? The answer is simple and complex. The way out of the shame cycle is out, is through it. We have to be willing to face, name, talk about, fight through, even feel our way through our shame and put it in its place to get out of it. We have to be willing to tolerate shame and guilt in order to break free of this. And we have to learn, and we can do that with most often, it's actually required to have the support of an unconditionally loving and accepting other in our lives to say, it's okay. So you did that. So that's the deal. Paul Goddard, one of our therapists, is very famous for saying, okay. No matter what the child says, okay, so this is what you did. I see you. So we have to have that experience, often very different than the anxious, angry, upset, and agitated experience of our family of origin, where somebody can just tolerate it. And that sounds scary to us parents, right? Because we are thinking that our agitation, our anger, our anxiety, our reaction is actually a mechanism to keep healthy behavior intact, to ward off, scare off unhealthy behavior. And we have to do this amazing letting go process of containing, of just not reacting, of just being curious, of just watching, oftentimes in order to provide a healthy context, a safe context in a relationship. So this shame cycle is an important part of communication. It gives us insight into what's going on with our children. But I'm going to go back to the skills and the tools before I go back to more theory. Let's talk about some basics to remember. Communication skills training is simple but hard. It's not easy and it's not complicated. It's pretty simple. Most everybody on this webinar tonight could memorize the 4 or 5 steps of an I feel statement, the 3 or 4 steps of reflective listening, or deep listening as the Buddhists call it. We can all memorize it. But in the moment, it eludes us. And we have other reactions. We have other triggers. See, we lose connection with the other when we go and think about ourselves and the reality and the way it really was and what should be. All of those things are not connected. Our anger and our frustration is evidence of a disconnection from others. And let me put it this way. If we had, nobody does, but if we had perfect empathy and perfect understanding of everybody and where their symptoms came from, right? It would be really hard to be mad at them. Have you guys seen those videos, those music videos, or these have been around for a long time, where it shows a series of behaviors in a day from various people that seem rude or seem unkind. And then they replay that exact same series of scenes, but you see the thought bubbles or the background of what somebody might have gone through that morning or that day. And then that's just simply to illustrate that's what it means to be connected. That's what it means to understand. And that need not compromise or sacrifice our boundaries, right? And that's another place that we get stuck. We have this belief in this dichotomy that if I understand you, I can't hold a boundary and take care of myself. If I understand and empathize with you, I'm going to sacrifice self-care for me and boundaries for me. And those two things don't need to happen in concert. It's much deeper than you imagine. That's why I say just try this bullet point down below. Try it for about 20 years. Just give it a try for the next 20 years. And I've been teaching this, like I've said many times, for 20 years. I've been teaching a variation of this webinar, mostly in person. I've taught it over 250 times. And every time I teach it, including tonight, it has a richness to it. And I understand that in a given moment, I might not have access to all the awareness, to all of the knowledge, to all of my background, to all of my insight. I might not have access to all of that, but I can access the skills. And so when in doubt, practice the communication skills training that we'll talk about. Try to be careful of shortcuts and behind the back passes. In any craft, the greatest among us, the greatest at the craft, at the skill, at the art, are incredibly disciplined in the basics, right? They're great at the basics. And I think for myself, I like to get into shortcuts and behind the back passes way too early in the process, right? Tiger Woods will putt a 6-foot putt 150 times in a day. I'll do that about twice, and then I get bored, and then I want to get out to about 12 feet and 18 feet. I'll go on the driving range for about 10 minutes. If you go to a pro golf tournament, they'll spend hours on the driving range just practicing one thing. This is what really talented, really great people do. So applying that to us is important. It helps to interrupt old habits and patterns. It's going to feel awkward. If any of you have ever taken a tennis lesson, for example, and they adjust your grip or adjust your approach, you will know what I mean when I say that it feels awkward. It feels like it's not going to work. But that's part of the idea. They want to interrupt old habits, old patterns, old processes. So these skills and tools do that for us. It's not beneath you. Many of you have heard the example of Pablo Casals, the great cellist, who at the age of 90 was practicing the scales on the day that he died. In fact, I read a follow-up quote the other day that somebody asked him, "Why are you practicing the scales this late in life?" He said, "Because I think I'm just about getting ready. I'm getting the hang of it." And so the greatest, the most talented have been able to practice the basics and have not thought it beneath them. It's okay to cheat. If you don't memorize it, use a cheat sheet. I've had parents that have actually carried around cards. Oftentimes out in the field, in family sessions and in groups, will hold up a card behind the person. Sometimes even taking notes is okay. And tell the person, this is what I'm writing down. I'm writing down what you're saying. It's okay to cheat. This is not a memory test. And the more skilled and practiced you get at it, the more you will be able to use it without the cheats and the notes, but it's not a weakness if you're using those kinds of things. Stick to the format, like I said, for just the next 20 years. And then after 20 years, we'll talk about the value of it or how it worked for you. Give it a chance to teach you. Oftentimes, we as adults, and I am guilty of this, we imagine that growth comes in the order of insight to behavior change. And what we also know is that behavior, even a smile, how many muscles in the face does it relax? How many endorphins does it release? We know that a smile can do that. Changing the way that we talk changes the way that we think. Simple as that. I've had parents who have been committed to the skill, and I hear them in a given moment trying to work their way through the skill, and I watch their brain change the way they think. We ask them to not use imperatives, right? We ask them to say, I feel when, instead of you make me feel. And I can see it having an impact on them. So it changes the way that we think about ourselves, changes the way that what we own, it changes the way that we see our relationship with others. And of course, like I said, and I'll mention this more than once tonight, it's not a tool to get other people to change. Let's give you the basics. These next two slides are the basic skill, and they're not the only ones that we'll talk about tonight. Our version of the feeling statement, and it's not incredibly unique, but it was intentional. We sat down to develop this, very intentional. It's I feel, and then you use an emotional word. Happy, sad, glad, mad, scared, right? You use an emotion. If the third word out of your mouth is the word that, I feel that, or like, I feel like, you're off track. You're about to express a thought or a perception. So you start with the most vulnerable piece. You start with the emotion. You own it. You're not saying, I choose to feel happy, because it's not like we choose to, not at least consciously, but it's mine. It's not like I'm choosing to be angry or scared at this moment, but it is mine. I own it. And then we give the event as close as we can to describing the event. I feel this way when this happens. I feel this way when you slam the door. I feel this way. It's not I feel this way when you get mad at me. It's I feel this way when you raise your voice, right? We try to talk about the event. And you know why it's so hard to own it like this? And if you pay attention, and I do, why it's hard for me to do this, with my wife especially, is I just want to blame her. I don't want to be responsible for my feelings. I want her to be responsible for my feelings. So I feel emotion when an event. I feel this way because I think or I believe. It's some sort of cognition, some sort of belief perception. And this is okay. This is where we learn to say, okay, so when you slam the door at me, I feel hurt when you slam the door at me. I feel this way because I think you must not like me. Because in our family, anger wasn't allowed. Or I feel scared when you slam the door because I think you're not coming back. Or I think I'm going to lose you. Or I think I'm going to be alone. Whatever it is. And then you're starting to, again, understand what your history has taught you. Really, you're talking about where your small and large trauma has wired your brain. So you're talking about your thinking and your beliefs. And I'm going to pause here and explain this. This process is called intra psychic differentiation. Interpersonal differentiation is knowing where you and I start and stop. Intrapsychic is understanding the relationship between my feelings, my emotions, my perceptions, and my beliefs, my thoughts. And if I can have awareness of all of those pieces and independently in how they relate, I can then make choices. I can then improve my sense of empowerment, my sense of consciousness. So I start to make choices instead of just react to things. And then this is kind of a two-parter. I hope in the future, and then you express a hope for yourself that you can control, right? I hope for myself I can learn to work on my side of the street. I hope for myself that I can work on reacting and yelling. I hope for myself that I cannot be whatever it is. And parents, I will tell you, this is amazing to watch a parent express this. Imagine, think of your child's most predominant symptom and think about what it is. If it's drug use, if it's cutting on themselves, if it's social isolation, whatever it is. And what's your hope in that context? And a lot of parents say, well, I don't really have a hope for myself. I mean, I just hope they'll stop cutting or using drugs, or I hope that their depression will lift or their anxiety will lift or their eating disorder will heal, whatever it is. But the fact of the matter, you're still in this equation, right? There's still something for you to focus on. There's still your side of the street. So what is that? What do you hope for yourself? I hope that I'll follow through on my boundaries. I hope that I'll continue to look at myself, to work on communication, to listen, whatever it is. And then I hope for what I can't control. Now, that's an easy one. We all can express pretty easily what we hope for others that we can't control, that we cannot control. We all come to that pretty easily. But this is the genius of including this in here, because there was a debate, and I've told this many times. There was a debate about whether or not to put this in there. And the argument against it was, why give children specifically, and parents, a stage to talk about trying to control somebody else's behavior? Why do that? And my thought was, the fact that we express it doesn't make it less powerful, or excuse me, more manipulative. It makes it less manipulative. The fact, if it goes unexpressed, it doesn't diminish. It doesn't not exist. It still exists. And so if we can say, part of what I like about this particular one, if I can say it like this, what I hope outside of my control, just saying that, what I hope outside of my control is that you'll stop fighting. I'm acknowledging that I can't control it. I'm reminding my brain what I can and can't control, which is a huge piece of mental health and a huge piece of recovery, what I can and can't control. So this part 3/4 right here is our way of helping improve everybody's sense of internal versus external locus control. What happens to me and what do I have a choice over? And that's important to make it as explicit as possible. So that's the sender. And this is what the listener's task is, to basically parrot it back. So what I hear you saying is, and then to the best of your ability, not interpreting, not judging, not analyzing, not placing a value on it, not getting very tricky. Just what I hear you saying is you're scared. You're scared when I slam the door. You feel this way because you think that I don't like you and you're going to be alone. I'm not going to come back. It reminds you of something, of that fear. And what you hope for me is that I'll talk instead of slamming the door and huffing off. And what you hope for yourself is that you'll remain calm and engage and not panic and not react to me. And then you ask, did I hear you correctly? If you need help along the way, like the second bullet point says, please, it's not a failure. It is not a failure if you ask for help. All that demonstrates is that you're trying to listen. And I will tell you, most people, most of our clients and students, folks, can do this perfectly after 3 weeks of intense training with us. And it takes parents a lot longer. It takes most people a lot longer. And again, I've been either having been trained in this as a young person in my own therapy or as a professional. I've been doing this for 30 years now. Actually, probably 40 years, almost 40 years now. And it takes practice. And I'm pretty good at the skill. But there are still times when I get lost, when I get triggered, when I react. and I have to go back to the basics, and I have to go back to asking for help. And immediately when my wife says something, I lose all consciousness, right? And go right to my reactive, to my own trauma, to my own triggers, to my own need to be good, to my own shame. I was talking to a friend today who shared some feedback with me, and I said, I have this really strong urge to be defensive, but I just want to start off and say, I'm very grateful that you told me. Thank you for telling me that. It's important that I know how you feel. So, all right, let's talk about what I call these advanced series skills, and I have 4 different levels. Stating the intent. This is the idea of before you give a feeling statement, tell the person what your intent is. I'm going to tell you how I feel, Dad, Mom, sweetheart, Johnny, Susie. I'm going to tell you how I feel. And I just want you to listen. And that's most often the intent. You could say, I'm going to tell you how I feel and I want you to change. I want you to do it different. I want you to consider something else. But by stating what you want, what the intent is, you become clear and you become more aware of, oh, I'm constantly in my life talking to people to try to get them to change. Change the way they feel, change the way they act. So stating the intent will be as instructive for you as it will be for the person you're speaking to. Ask the intent of the sender. When somebody's sharing something with you at the beginning, in the middle, and the end through the process, you're telling me, I'm hearing this. What's your intent? What would you like for me to do with this? Oftentimes, I do this at the end of it because I want to know, do you want me to listen? And oftentimes, people will ask for you to give a reaction. I'll get to that in one of the more advanced series. That's rarely helpful and rarely what they really want. Oftentimes, when somebody wants your reaction, they're really just beginning the process or making an invitation for a debate. Like I said, do something new. It's going to be uncomfortable. A new golf grip is going to be uncomfortable, right? A new approach to anything is going to be uncomfortable. So try something new. It's not for behavior changes. It's not for getting the other person to change. The students and clients learn that pretty quickly in our program. They learn after they learn the communication skills, they finally resign themselves to doing it. And they share the feeling statement with us or with you or with their peer, and they come to this quick realization, but nothing's going to change, right? Because their measurement of change, of why do anything, is what's this thing outside of me going to do to make a difference? But that's not what it's for. It's for intrapsychic awareness, the possibility for interpersonal awareness, and for more ownership and empowerment and making sense. It helps to avoid rescuing. It helps you steer out of some of those patterns of rescuing other people, which, by the way, sometimes we think of rescuing as this over kind of nurturing, sappy response. But rescuing actually is annoying as anything for most of us, right? I am so intolerant of rescue. I don't see rescuing as actually nurturing at all. When somebody's telling me how to feel or not listening to my feelings by responding, by teaching or lecturing or explaining to me, my whole thought is, you're just not listening. I don't think of that as them expressing love or care or desire for me not to experience uncomfortable, undesired emotions. I experience that as their inability to listen to me, discount me, dismiss it. So helps you avoid rescuing, but there are other words or ideas for that. It promotes differentiation, both intrapsychic, like I explained, and interpersonal. It has the capacity to improve the relationship. And part of what we start to teach, what this can set you up for, is learning to hear the I feel statement. So when somebody gets upset with you, you can say, I hear that you're scared. Kids will come to me and saying, this is bullshit. I don't want to stay here. I got to call my parents. I got to do this. And my response is, I know it's frustrating. I know it's so hard. Or when parents say, I want more calls. In my family, when people come, my little daughter complains or my son complains, I can just say, I know. It's super hard, isn't it? And initially, that's going to be hard for people because we're not used to just being heard. We want more. We tell our children how we feel so we can be present with them and more intentional in our response to them. Again, that's from that chapter in The Journey of the Heroic Parent. Second 100 series, or 200 series, excuse me. Returning an I feel statement with another I feel. Be careful. You've given me your I feel statement, now I got one for you. There needs to be some space there. I don't know if that space is a minute, an hour, 5 hours, a day, 5 days, 5 weeks, 5 years, but there needs to be space. It needs to have its time on the stage. And returning another I feel statement with an I feel statement with another I feel statement is much like reacting. It's like a wolf in sheep's clothing, right? It's still reactive. You're still not giving it a place. You're still not containing, as we call it in therapy. You're just having this reaction, but you're cloaking it in the skill of an I feel statement. Ask the sender if you can return an I feel statement with an I feel statement, and really ask them, say, I have something that I'm feeling right now. Is it okay right now if I share it? Or do you want me to wait? And then they give permission or not. And then you've given it some stage. But again, be wary, folks. A lot of the back and forth is not going to be interrupted or stopped by your child or by anybody for that matter. We don't know how much we love to entangle ourselves. It's very hard for us to experience intimacy, which is a separateness while we're connected. We are most often more comfortable with this or with this. Reacting to the I feel or clarifying facts. Almost never helpful. Almost never. Probably the biggest temptation that people have. I like to use the tool that when my wife explains something to me about me that's upset her about me, I pretend like she's talking about some other idiot that she's married to. And when I do that, I can listen to her very well. Right? And the more grounded I am at any given moment or in any given period in my life, the more able that I'm to do that. The more I don't need to make the facts align with my facts. The more I don't need to prove anything. Because why do I need to prove anything if I know it? So my capacity, the capacity to listen is rooted in a strong sense of self. And I don't need to clarify facts. Imperatives and exaggerations or thinking errors, in terms of expressing them, be wary of them. But also you're going to see some of that in somebody's expression. It's okay. We exaggerate there on our social media, there was a great quote from a student the other day. I think it was Thursday or Friday. A young adult student from our Cascades, Evoke Cascades program. And the young person or the young adult person said, I'm learning something like this. I'm learning to feel things. And then it's okay to feel things even if I don't have a good reason to. And she's learning to check in and just understand, believe, and experience from the group. It's okay just to feel what I'm feeling. And sometimes we use exaggerative, hostile language to emphasize our point. The reason that I'll exaggerate is because if I told you exactly what happened, you might think, well, he's overreacting. But if I exaggerate, you'll be like, yeah, I can see why you're mad. I can see why you're upset. So if we just listen to it, and without assigning a certain value to the specific facts of it, we're more likely to encourage the person coming to a grounded, letting it pass through them, seeing it more realistically, and so forth and so on. So be wary of expressing imperatives, exaggerations, or thinking errors, and have some patience when the other expresses those things. After giving an I feel statement, ask for a reaction and be open to the response. The way that you know that someone's open to the response is when you give it, the person says okay. So if I give you a response to your feeling, to what's going on for you, and your response is, thanks for telling me, then that's what you wanted. If your response is, yeah, but, then you didn't want to hear me. That's not what we were doing. We were just beginning in a very polite way to have a debate or an argument. 300 series, Know Thyself, the difference between behaviorism and connection. It's very important that we learn to parent on these two continuums very separately. The connection is one thing, and behavioral techniques, tactics, boundaries are another thing. And that we not use emotionally laden language to try to coerce behavior. Because then we're really just reinforcing, doesn't feel like it, it seemed like it, but we're really just enforcing peer pressure. So understand that there's behavioral stuff and there is connection stuff. I used to talk about it or illustrate it by imagining the image of a large, tall brick wall with a big ear painted on it, right? That's the ideal parent. I'm gonna be solid, I'm gonna be grounded, I'm gonna have my boundaries, and I'm gonna listen to the end of the day. And neither one of those two are gonna rob the other. Remember that questions are questions and statements are statements. This is another thing you just get better at. And so many of us know in our families, we know when mom says that or dad says that, we know what they mean. Or when we ask questions like, what? Is that, what were you thinking? We don't mean is what were you thinking, we're meaning, hey, you're an idiot. That's what we mean by that. Don't you think it would be great if you just didn't care what your peers felt? We don't mean that. We mean something else. We mean the statement. We're expressing a belief. And there's no right answer to these questions that aren't questions. And then it's okay to ask a statement. Say, so tell me about peer pressure. Tell me why. I remember I've told the story to many of you. You've heard it. Where I talk about when my son came home, we found out he was bullying a neighbor. And I said to him, does it make you feel big and tough to bully this weaker kid? And he thought about it for a couple of seconds and he said, yeah. And then I was infuriated, even though he told me the truth, right? I knew the answer. I was just trying to shame him at the moment. And I got angry and sent him up in his room and consequenced him way too much. And then I realized, no, that's why we all make fun of and bully other people, because we're feeling insecure and we want to feel bigger. And he told me the truth, and I punished him for it. I got more angry for it. Repetitive I feel statements. I always say one I feel statement is great, two is forgivable, and three is manipulation. So if somebody's giving you their third I feel statement, pause and say, I think I've heard this. Is there something you're looking for other than me hearing this? I was talking to a parent and a client the other day, two parents and a client on the phone the other day, wilderness call. And the point that I made was, how can your parents prove to you that they hear you other than giving you what they want? If the only way that parents can prove, or anyone for that matter, can prove that they're listening is if they agree with you and give you what you want, we're in trouble. At the same time, these specific parents also needed some help learning to listen. So there was the dynamic back and forth. And so watch for that. Ask for the intent and understand that repetitiveness, often you're trying to get some outcome. Inflammatory content, it's easy to kind of douse the I feel statement in gasoline and light it on fire. I call it weaponizing the skill and the tool. I can come pretty close to giving you a technically accurate I feel statement and use some pretty inflammatory language, especially in the third step, the belief or interpretation stage. As we get more advanced, not only do we learn to listen, but we learn to express empathy, to see it. We know what pain feels like. We don't have to feel the same way. We understand what peer pressure feels like when our child talks about it. We don't give them a lecture about peer pressure. We share with them that we still struggle with what other people think sometimes. We're patient and be patient and don't overcorrect. Listen to the intent of the I feel statement and the spirit of it. The spirit of the I feel statement rather than the specifics. Sometimes overcoaching is distracting, even for the therapist and the staff at Evoke. Be willing to stop, take time out, quit, sleep on it, or otherwise interrupt. You don't have to solve everything. And the older I get, the more I value timeouts. And by the way, if you think the other person needs a timeout, it's very likely that you're actually the one who needs it, because you're about to blow up. You're about to not tolerate what they're saying or doing. So take some time. It's almost always better after 10 or 15 minutes or an hour. Almost always. This is really about taking ownership. This is not about I choose to feel these feelings, but they are mine. If I go to pat you on the shoulder and you flinch because you've been abused by your father, right? Your fear is yours. I didn't cause it. It came from your context, right? But if I'm connected to you and I'm sympathetic and it doesn't violate any of my boundaries and you share that with me, then I can make a choice. That next time I think about patting you on the shoulder, I ask for permission. Or maybe I don't pat you on the shoulder. So as we move farther along in the skill, the complexities of the relationship become, it's like they're moving slower. Have any of you ever, of course I use a lot of sports analogies, they talk about in professional sports, that the great ones, that it's moving very slowly for them. I hear that with musicians. Sometimes it's called flow, right? There's this kind of hyper focus where everything is moving so slow for the person. So ownership, connection, all of that becomes more apparent as we use these skills, becomes more conscious. And then sometimes we can start to, this is the back cut and, back behind the back pass and shortcut that I talked about. We can use natural I feel statements or shorten them. I wouldn't suggest that you get there very quickly. I've never seen parents, I rarely see parents in the short period of time that we work with them during the program get to the point where using natural or I feel statements or street I feel statements is appropriate. They start to lose the message. Sometimes I see students, because they're very intensely immersed in the program, sometimes 6, 7, 8, 9 weeks long, I see them using I feel statements, the street version of it, kind of a natural version of it, with less formal, and they're still retaining the skills and the tools. But be careful of that. So family systems theory, right? This is the theory of how people interrelate. Salvador Minuchin, one of the founders of family therapy, explained that enmeshment was being too close, that being disengaged was too far away, and something in the middle was called clear boundaries. Murray Bowen had a slightly different take. Murray Bowen said that fusion, like enmeshment, and cut off, like disengaged, are the same thing. They're just stylistically different. They're on one end of the continuum over here. And on the other end of the continuum is differentiation. So whether your style is to slam the door and walk out and not talk, or to cry and fight and stay engaged, it doesn't really demonstrate a qualitative difference in your ability to be separate and connected. That's what differentiation is. It's the capacity to be separate and connected. In fact, attachment theory teaches us, as does analytic theory, that separateness is a requirement for connectedness. So Murray Bowen talked about this continuum from 0 to 100, that we know none of us are at 100 and none of us are at 0, but we can measure our differentiation on that scale, and that the stylistic difference of fusion and cutoff are unimportant, relatively speaking. So this provides us with a tool that teaches it, that illustrates it, that models it. It's the operationalization of healthy communication, right? I love analytic theory. I love attachment theory. This tool also I love because it helps us in our moments where we lose our mind, where we lose our insight, where we lose our grounding, right? Where we become reactive, where we become triggered. It really does, if we practice it, it does lead us to the principles of healthy attachment, of healthy differentiation, both internally and in our relationships. So what is the goal? It's not behavior change. It's to find a presence. A lot of parents will say, this isn't good enough, Brad. This is not good. It's not going to do anything for us. That's most people's experience. And that's because, of course, they're measuring it as behavior change in the child or behavior change in the other. And if that's what you're measuring it about, you're right. That's not good enough. And it's going to be really uncomfortable. It's going to feel contrived. It's going to feel trite. It's going to feel, at the beginning, like almost sarcastic at times. But it is what healthy relationships look like. We just don't have a lot of experience with them in our own family of origin. That's why we all don't like this very much. What if only one person is willing to participate? Those parents who have been through the program, either before at some point, know that that happens a lot. And the answer is it still works. Even if I'm sitting alone in my own room, going over the I feel statements, going over what's going on for me, what I'm feeling and what I'm thinking, it works. Even if the other person lashes back out at me, it works. Even if I listen to the other person when they're lashing back out at me, it works, right? My side of the street is clear. Like I said, interpersonally, it creates the opportunity for connection. And intrapersonally, it creates the opportunity for me to be more aware of myself and to make decisions from a more conscious, slowly moving place. We learn to listen to what people are not saying, and it's not about you. You know, most of the time when you react to the other, you're communicating. It's about you, and it's not. In the book, The Four Agreements, which many of you do know, may know, and a lot of our students and clients read it, the point that he makes is it's never about you. Even when they think that you're great, it's not about you. And when they think they're horrible, it's not about you. When they hit you in the face, it's not about you. It's not about you. And the more grounded, and think of the great leaders that have walked on the earth. They know that. In the end, do nothing else, just listen. And listen and listen. And no, you are not doing a good job at this. I put that on there because get in line, right? We're not very good at this. Make this your project. Make this one of your projects to learn to listen better. And I rarely meet an adult. Who's a great listener. I'm not talking about an ability to intellectually or academically listen to information and internalize and regurgitate. I'm not talking about that. A lot of people I meet are good at that. I'm talking about emotionally being present with somebody and listening and tolerating it and doing what analysts call containing. When we use healthy communication skills built upon a foundation of deeper principles and understanding, we create a safe place for our children and beckon them out of self-medicating symptoms and into genuine feeling. Communication skills become the tools for unpacking the pain beneath the symptoms. That's from the Journey of the Heroic Parent again. So that's my message for tonight. I'm happy to take topic-related questions, and then I'll go through announcements, and then if there are any unrelated questions, I'm happy to take those at the very end. Nothing so far. All right, I'll go to the end. Here's my book. I show the book every time, and it's a good book, meaning that it's like notes. Somebody said, in fact, this person's on the webinar this evening, I believe. It's like the notes of my favorite webinar. And of course, it's in print, so you can read it slowly and reflect on it and slow it down. So it really is the basics of what we teach at Evoke. And the title is about taking the inward journey, because that's what the hero's journey is. Joseph Campbell's message of the hero's journey is that it's always an inward journey. Doesn't matter what myths, legends, and stories we read about, where they're going out on great quests. In the case of this quest, it is to save your child. We think it's the thing that they're searching for, and it really is a greater, deeper understanding of oneself. That's the hero's journey. The intensive and workshops coming up. We have a workshop on the 20th and 21st, hosted by Paul Goddard. Email Gail at evoketherapy.com. I'm hosting the 25th and the 28th parenting intensive called Heroic Parenting. Lots of psychodrama, wonderful, deeper, more personal work. Somewhere between 5 and 10 people is what we look for. So you're getting a lot of attention. It's out at our Oasis, at our Entrada Field area. Heroic Journeys is the entire family. So we're going to take 2 or 3 families, maybe 4 if they're small. We're going to take them out there, and you're going to do multi-family group work. A lot of people are asking me about custom intensives, but I'll tell you that this multi-family group work sometimes is richer, because you're getting feedback, you're getting peers, and you get to do work by watching other people do work. Here are the upcoming parent support groups. I did have a complaint today that we're not doing the middle of the country. I will do my best to try to get to the middle of the country more often and spread it out, but right now we're on the coast. So here are the upcoming meetings and the emails associated with the meeting. So please RSVP there. Please RSVP. And if you RSVP, please come if you say that you're going to come, because we've had some RSVPs with some no-shows lately. We want every family to attend 6 of these while their child is with us. If there's one assignment that you can do that has the chance of contributing to your child's retention of progress and growth, it is go to these meetings, participate in these meetings. We have our young adult, our new program, our Pursuits program in the summertime. We have a 14-day experience coming up on June 13th. Sober fun, not heavily clinical, more experiential, more fun. It is run by our field staff, but it's not therapeutic necessarily. It's not clinical, but I guess it is therapeutic. But it's mostly fun. But it's somebody looking for a refresher, a reboot, or just sober fun. Please follow us on social media. This is some of the way that we can disperse information, invites, and so forth, rather than just by email. Also, if you go to our Parent Alumni Foundation book page, you can order books, and a percentage of the profits goes to the Amazon Smiles program, where they donate it to the charity of our choice, which is a charity that helps fund treatment for people who can't afford it. The next webinar is on Wednesday at 7 p.m. One of my favorite earliest webinars, also one of the chapters out of the book, and talking about the relationship between guilt, the blame that we place on people and on ourselves, and what really accountability is. So that relationship, that interaction between those concepts and overlap and so forth. So this Wednesday, 7 p.m. Mountain Time. Look forward to it. All right, one last call for any other questions, either on topic or off topic. Should an addict read your book? I have a couple of thoughts about that. Probably I find, and I have a lot of friends in recovery for addiction and alcoholism. I have a lot of friends, people that I admire, that are in recovery for those things. And at times, I wish that part of their program was going to CODA or going to Al-Anon, because they don't see. A lot of times the focus is on not using. And of course, there for many is a deeper spiritual understanding of what addiction is beneath the actual consumption of a drug. And people can learn that and see that. But my answer is yes, because this book tells you about your relationship with yourself and with others and with their problems. And if you're an addict, in recovery, I think that, just my experience, and it might not apply to you, but my experience is those that are addicts and in recovery often are underschooled and undertaught and underaware of their codependent traits, right? So my answer is absolutely, I think it's helpful. Can you articulate the difference between the parent workshop and the parent intensive? Yes, great. The parent workshop is a 2-day in a hotel, skills, tools, lectures, some light activities. The parent intensive is out at the oasis, not in a hotel, sleeping in the yurts, psychodrama 8 hours a day, deep personal work, drawing, art, experiential activities. There's some education that, of course, happens in the context of it, but it's like the difference between going to a psychoeducational class that's really moving and really powerful, which is the workshop, and a therapy session, which also is very moving, but much more personal and much deeper in the process. So those are the differences. It's probably just to make it simple, psychoeducation with some experience versus deep therapy with a little bit of psychoeducation. If my child does not have issues with substance, why would I go to Al-Anon or any other meeting? That's a great question. Um, Al-Anon, Al-Anon specifically is the qualifying issue for the participant in Al-Anon is I have somebody in my family that's an alcoholic or an addict, right? That's the qualifier. But the principles about being in a relationship with somebody who's participating in self-destructive or unhealthy behaviors is the same. It's the same. So if your child has never used drugs or alcohol but is depressed and cutting, if they have an eating disorder, if they are an alcoholic or an addict, if they are an angry, raging child, oppositional, defiant, getting in trouble, if they're socially isolating, right? If they're overly anxious, all of those behaviors, all of those self-medicators, if you will, create the exact same kinds of dynamics. So I go to Al-Anon and Coda, and I don't have an alcoholic or addict qualifier in my life. I don't. My wife goes, and she doesn't have one either, because it's not about the thing that they're doing. Right? It's not that they're drinking and they're yelling, or falling down drunk, or losing their job. It's just I can't control them. What's my relationship like with this person who's suffering from a mental health issue or an addiction? It's all the same. So we have that's what people, when they go, they often say they're talking about their alcoholic wife and I can't relate. The deeper lessons, the deeper principles, that's part of what my book tries to illustrate, is that it's all the same. Because the question about parenting is not about parenting, it's about me. Right? The question always comes back to me, knowing myself and my relationship with others, and my relationship with their problems. So we have to, when I hear somebody say alcoholic, I hear somebody say, I got my 7-year-old's an alcoholic. She doesn't drink alcohol, but she's an alcoholic. She's crazy, right? So how do I relate to this thing, this person that I can't control? So that's why it's not about, and if that makes you uncomfortable, then go to Families Anonymous or go to CODA, because those are more general than it being about Al-Anon. But oftentimes Al-Anon meetings have stronger culture and a bigger history. So, and I don't lose myself in the specifics of the example when I do it. And as you move along, you won't either. You'll see the similarities. That's why in our program, a girl sitting next to a girl who's never used any drugs, sitting next to a girl who's used lots of drugs, will say this once she starts to get it. She'll say, I don't use drugs, but anger is my drug, or lying is my drug, or sex is my drug. So yeah, we have different symptoms, different medicating behaviors, but I use anger and lying the way that you use alcohol. So when we get it, we see past the content and we see into the process. I went to an Al-Anon meeting and found it very sad and depressing. Should I push through it or find another meeting? Feel free to find another meeting. They ask you to go to 6, and there are meetings that are better than others. But I'll tell you this. I can remember one specific parent, and I'm going to use one in my mind, who said this. She lives in New York City. She's not on here tonight. Um, when I told her to go for the first time, she lives in Long Island. When I told her to go the first time, she was angry with me. She hated it. She thought it was depressing. And now when she goes there, she finds it to be a place of hope. She finds it to be inspirational. And you see your eyes change, right? When I go to an AA meeting, I don't find it depressing. When I go to a Narcotics Anonymous meeting, I don't find it depressing. When I go to an Al-Anon meeting, are there people there that might be whining, might be stuck? For sure, but that's not my thing, right? That's not my program. My program is my program. I go there to be reminded of principles. So, but my thought is go ahead and try other meetings. That's fine, but also try at least 6. and so that you can give yourself a chance to start hearing it differently. That's why parents that come to my to a parent meeting, their first week or two or three in the program, they say to me, I'm not sure I understand everything that you're talking about. When they come to the third or the fourth one, they're like, it all makes sense to me. Because this experience, and you didn't sign up for it, and you wouldn't necessarily have your child have these problems. It teaches you a deeper way of being in the world. It teaches you a deeper meaning. It's like when you take art class in college, and at first you think a lot of it's just random, and then you learn, oh my gosh, there's incredible science behind this art that I knew nothing about. And you see things differently. So my opinion is try at least 6, but it's okay to try a few. All right, folks. Thank you very much for this. I assume that's the last one, Stephanie. Yeah. Thank you, guys. Have a great evening. I will talk to you Wednesday evening. Take care. Bye-bye.